All right, time for another Bearded Wonder Explains. This time we're looking at the American War for Independence, the Northern Campaign. So, the American War for Independence can basically be broken into two kind of halves. The first half takes place mostly in New England, New York, a little bit in Pennsylvania, and then the second half happens in the South. So today we're talking about the first half, basically 1775 to 1777. So here we go. So, the first battle of the American War for Independence really is Lexington and Concord. Lexington and Concord basically were arsenals. They were holding weapons, and as things were getting a little bit more dicey, the British decided that they needed to go and secure those weapons, that they were vulnerable, that colonial militia could go to Lexington and Concord and actually take control of those cannons and guns and other things like that. And so they decided that they were going to go and secure those things. This is obviously when Paul Revere kind of makes his famous midnight run, telling other people the British are coming, the British are coming. And so we have the Minutemen. They're named that because they were supposedly ready in 1 minute, run out and basically turn into speed bumps on the road to kind of try to slow down the British advance. And so that is kind of Lexington and Concord. Not really a decisive victory for anybody, but the colonies a moderate victory for them because they do manage to turn the British back around. The next kind of thing that we want to talk about is the Continental Congress. At this point, the colonies all kind of recognize that they need to work together and that they need an army. And so they raise a Continental Congress. They beg George Washington to join them. Interesting thing about George Washington. In a lot of history books, you'll read that George Washington kind of was very humble, that he kind of turned down the commission or said, surely there's somebody else better. He's got this kind of humility kind of a thing going on. The reality is, though, that George Washington showed up to the Continental Congress with a custom-made jacket, military jacket. And so he showed up, and basically he was hyper aware of the way that history was going to remember him. And so I've read some compelling articles that make the suggestion that it was all a show, that the humility of George Washington was because he knew that it would look good in our textbooks now, and that's why he did it, not because he was actually this shy kind of guy that didn't want control of the army. He very much did. He just wanted to make sure that it looked like he didn't. In any case, George Washington is approved to be the commander of the United States, or the Continental Army is what they called it. And he's on his way up to Boston because that's kind of where all the problems are. While he's still on his way, we have the Battle of Bunker Hill. The Battle of Bunker Hill was basically... Bunker Hill is a hill around Boston Harbor, and the colonists had kind of built a makeshift fort there, and the British were trying to get control of it to control the city of Boston better. Boston Massacre, Boston Tea Party, Boston, Boston, Boston. And so it makes sense that Boston is kind of the first town that they want to get under control. So Bunker Hill was a hill, and actually the battle wasn't just on Bunker Hill. It was on other hills as well that were around Boston, but that's the name that stuck. And basically what ends up happening is that the British get the hill and take control of it, so they kind of won. At the same point, the colonists inflicted very heavy casualties on the British. And so they kind of claim it as a moral victory, almost like a, well, you won, but we won kind of a thing. And what we're going to see, especially when we're talking about the Revolutionary or the American War for Independence, keep in mind you're talking about armies that are like 5,000 Like that's a big army at that time, is 5,000 men, which is tiny by the time we get to the Civil War. And so if you lose 500 or 600 men and have another, 700 of them injured, like that's a huge deal. And so there were definitely a lot of battles where one side won, right? Like they were standing on the battlefield at the end of the day, so we say that those people won. But it took so many casualties to get there that they didn't really win. And so we could kind of call Bunker Hill one of those where the winner didn't win and the loser didn't lose. But we can't quite call it a tie either. After that, we have a Battle of Boston. George Washington does show up. He basically tries to keep control of Boston. It fails slowly, but fails, and so Boston is kind of left under the control of the British, and George Washington retreats south to New York, to Long Island, and basically almost gets trapped there. And so George Washington barely escapes from New York. It's another major victory for the British, and that brings us to basically the Battle of Trenton. This is where our famous picture here comes from. George Washington at nighttime kind of rows across an icy cold Delaware River and then marches 15 or 20 miles to surprise the British Hessian soldiers, basically Prussians that they had, or Germans that they had paid to come to America to fight on their side, and the Americans surprised them, and it's a major victory. It's why we use that picture today. Obviously, the famous one in New York City does not have the lightsabers in it. I think it's an improvement personally, but in any case, Trenton is a major victory for the colonists in one regard, but it doesn't. The reason why the British are hiring other people to go fight for them is because when those people die, it doesn't really hurt Britain, right? I mean, you paid money for them, but it's not a major deal to them. The British eventually get control of Philadelphia as well, and so if you look at these British victories on the right, Boston, New York, Philadelphia, these are like 3 of the 4 biggest cities. The only one missing from this list in 1777 is Charleston. All of the other major cities are being controlled by the British. Lexington and Concord, Bunker Hill, Trenton. These are kind of small-time victories. The American colonial forces are in need of a big victory, and this brings us to the Battle of Saratoga. And basically, Washington sends 2 of his kind of star generals, Horatio Gates and Benedict Arnold. He sends them north, and the British under John Burgoyne also heads north. The British are trying to cut off New York and New England from the rest of the colonies by controlling central New York, and so there's going to be kind of like a big battle that takes place there. And so we have this kind of battle between not the major generals, but the generals' kind of apprentices. And Saratoga ends up being a massive victory for the colonists. Burgoyne gets himself surrounded. He gets himself in a really bad position. He ends up having to surrender his entire force. The colonists, at least Horatio Gates, made the deal with them that they could return to England, but then the Continental Congress said, "No, we think we're going to keep the soldiers here." And so it's a major, major victory for the Americans. As a matter of fact, Saratoga is kind of that battle that France was waiting for. They wanted to stick it to the British, and in fact, some of the cannons that had a big role to play in the Continental Army winning at Saratoga were given to them by the French. But the French didn't want to fight in a losing war. And if we talked about these like big battles for the British, small ones for the colonists, the French are waiting for a big battle to be won by the Americans, and then they're going to declare war on the British. Saratoga is that battle for them. And so that's what happens. You might have recognized the name Benedict Arnold. Benedict Arnold is one of the most famous traitors in American history. He actually became a double agent for the British, and is I mean, people use, like, when they say don't be a Benedict Arnold, what they're literally saying is don't be a traitor. And Benedict Arnold kind of accepted, or at least believed, this idea that the British were so powerful that the only way that anybody was going to win was by fighting with the British. And so he actually becomes a traitor. He's still a general in the Continental Army while he's secretly trying to help the British to win the war. And so Benedict Arnold, when you kind of get down to it, that's his story. But at Saratoga, he is a legit American hero. That's what made his betrayal even that much more painful for the colonists, is the fact that he was such a traitor. So hopefully you got my little Star Wars references there. I thought they were pretty clever, and if not, you're just going to have to get yourself educated on your own time and watch a few Star Wars movies so that you'll understand history better. That's it for me today. Hope you have a good day.